Go ahead and start. All right. Well, hey, good morning, everybody. And this is Jomo Stewart and Roger Burgraff here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation. It is Tuesday, October 26th, about 8:10 a.m. And we're here for this week's Energy for All Alaska Task Force on a slightly different subject than our fairly customary energy and natural resources. We're going to discuss redistricting. So as everyone knows, or as everybody should know, every 10 years under the Constitution, they run a national census, find out everybody who's here, and use that as a basis for apportionment for a whole range of things. Federal funding, all kinds of great stuff. But of course, redistricting, redrawing the maps to encourage the one person, one vote. Yes. So here we are. So it's that time again, and we do have as our guests Ms. Sara Obed of Doyon, as well as Ms. Marna Sanford, both with the Doyon Coalition, who has provided one of the maps under consideration, but here to give us a walkthrough both of the map that has been provided by them, but also the other maps. And just to let everybody know that what I believe that there's going to be a public hearing at the Assembly on this matter on Thursday. It was just noted in the paper. So they're moving rapidly to certify these maps so that folks can start getting ready for the next election season. So let's do the walkthrough. So if I may, without further ado, hand it over to you ladies, Ms. Obed and Ms. Sanford.
Thanks, guys. I really just want to say thank you to FEDCO for welcoming us. I know this is not energy and natural resources per se, but the impacts for Fairbanks and the impacts for the interior will be felt at least for the next 10 years. And that is the very reason Doyon is getting engaged in redistricting. About 8 years ago, 10 years ago, really, in the last redistricting process, I would say that Doyon took a pass at getting engaged in redistricting. We did look at the maps. We took the time to think about what they mean for the interior and did not weigh in through the public process in what I would consider a meaningful way for Doyon. And as a result, I don't know, Marna, if you have the chance to pull up the current map. As a result, we have a map that doesn't really represent the interior region. So here's the current map. Here's the different House districts. 6C there is currently represented by Kronk's district. And if you look over at District 40, you can see Bettles, Allakaket, Hughes are all in District 40. Huslia, Nulato, and Galena are all in District 39. McGrath, Anvik, Holy Cross, Grayling, and Shagaluk are all in District 37. And what we found is that those villages are essentially micro minorities in other coastal districts. And as a whole, they've kind of been disenfranchised in the process. We've had representatives, chiefs from those villages go down to Juneau, and people have not recognized that they're a constituent. And so really our goal was in participating in this process is to have an interior unified House district, a rural House seat, which is represented in the map that we presented. So I'll pull open the Doyon Coalition proposed plan. And so this is what we proposed. Our map includes all of the Doyon villages and all of the Atna villages in one interior rural House seat. And that was our main goal for getting engaged, is to kind of pull our people back together. And it's based on some premises that the courts have allowed. For example, the idea of using ANCSA boundaries as an indicator of socioeconomic integration. That's kind of one of the for rural Alaska, mostly for rural Alaska, not really for interior Alaska. That's one of the main premises. So our coalition includes Doyon, but we are also partnering with Tanana Chiefs Conference, and Doyon and TCC are often on different sides of many issues, including some natural resource and energy development issues, but On this one, we're working in partnership with one another. Atna, once we pulled all of their villages into the rural interior house seat, their villages are where the mouse is hovering. They wanted all of their villages to be together in one interior house seat. And so together with all of the Doyon interior villages, they've also joined our coalition. And then Alaska, which is the ANCSA Regional Corporation for Southeast Alaska, is also in our coalition. And as we drew our map, their input helped inform the development of our Southeast map. So you'll see on our map, the way we presented our map, essentially, we have a strong focus on rural Alaska. And we've gotten the feedback that our Anchorage map and our Matsu map, for example, are not particularly great. And that's because we didn't emphasize that in our drawing. But we did try to be very fair in keeping neighborhoods and communities together, and in rural areas try to keep those ANCSA regional boundaries, use those to inform our map making for rural Alaska, if you will. Yes,
if I may, and I don't want to lose your train of thought, but where are we looking right now on the Alaska Redistricting website? Because I'm really liking this function of being able to truly zoom in, zoom out around the map.
So if you go to Alaska Redistricting Board website, and maybe Marna, you could just go to their homepage real quick. So if here's the homepage, and you click on Map Gallery, and then each of the proposed maps, and this kind of feeds really well into where I was going to go next about all of the other third parties. So you'll see there's two board versions, 3 and 4. They had a board version 1 and 2 that they replaced with board versions 3 and 4 early on. And then the other third parties, there's 4 third parties here. You scroll down, you have AFFER, AFFR, the Doyon Coalition, which is our coalition, and the Senate Minority Proposed Plan. So those were the third-party maps that got adopted by the board for public consideration. There's one other map that didn't get included, and that was the Democratic Party map. Their plan was rejected, and I do think they had some problems with their map that they really made it very difficult for it to be taken into consideration. So just introducing, maybe Marna, I'll let you introduce some of the other third parties, and you'll be able to see, Marna's got them all pulled up, but if you click on any of the AFFR Proposed Plan Interactive or AFFER Proposed Plan Interactive, they have the maps where you can toggle around in there and zoom in.
Yeah, the maps on this website is, I mean, I am such a huge fan of all of the things that they put together. Not only do they have all of the proposed maps on here in interactive version, which I'll show you how cool that is in a minute, on this website too, you can also draw districts. So you can hop on here and potentially try to draw your own districts. It's super fun, super easy to use. And yeah, lots of really great stuff on the website. So one of the things that I think we did really well at our coalition was we hit the ground running right off the bat, talking about how that unified interior district was not only possible, but it made sense for all of Alaska. And I think we were pretty successful in getting that message across to the board. Ultimately, the 2 board maps that they ended up adopting, board version 3, as you can see here, has a unified interior and a southeastern Alaska with an islands district as we've requested. and board version 4 with our unified interior and with our islands district. Again, variations on that theme, but certainly something that the board heard us on and said, all right, let's see if we can't draw some maps that incorporate those things for rural Alaska. So we were really pretty pleased with that. So as of right now, board version, the Doyon Coalition, board version 3 and board version 4 all have a version of our interior house seat, like you see here, this large, basically Doyon/TCC district, if you will, and some version of this long, narrow Southeastern Islands district. Now, those are the only 3 maps that have both of those things. When you go to the third-party maps, you'll see that they took some different approaches. AFF-ER, Alaskans for Fair and Equitable Redistricting, and I'd say to some degree, both AFFR and Senate Minority were very, very hyper aware of the deviations. And so for those of you who don't talk and speak redistricting every single day, I know that, so Jomo gave you the intro that, you know, the reapportionment is something we do every decade after we do the census. And essentially that census, I mean, part of the main purpose of the census is to uphold that fundamental tenet of a representative government, right? Which is one person, one vote. You take the entirety of the population of Alaska, you divide it by 40, and that number is the number that is supposed to be the ideal for each House district. And you want to have it as close to that number as possible, because that allows each district to have the same representation in Juneau. You don't want one district to have too many people in it, which is actually what the Mat-Su is going through right now, right? They have too many people in each of their districts. So technically in Juneau, they are underrepresented. And in Fairbanks, we have too few people in a number of our districts. So in Fairbanks, technically right now, we are overrepresented, meaning each person's vote just counts for a little bit more than one person. So again, we do the census, we do the, we get that number, that $1 million number, and we try to make all of our districts as close to that number as possible. In our map drawing, we came off that number for a few different reasons, and the court says you can. You can come off that number for, if depending on how you weigh socioeconomic integration, depending on how each region feels about where they want the lines to be drawn. I would say that AFF-ER, AFFR, and the Senate minority were much more hyper focused on having low deviations, even if that meant that some of the pairings and some of the lines were drawn maybe not in the most ideal places. Again, that's just my opinion. And this is what you get, Jomo, for having us present on other people's maps.
Well, Marna, and before you go there, I think we did tell Jomo we would introduce some of the other people's maps. And before you opine on the other people's maps, I'd like to talk about those coalitions. So AFF-ER was presented by Randy Rudrick, and it's the Alaskans for Fair and Equitable Redistricting. Randy Rudrick, I really enjoyed talking to. He's been engaged in redistricting for a long time. I would say probably multiple iterations. And I'll be frank and say that Chalista is part of the AFF-ER coalition, and they're really on that participation. They're really looking at Southwest Alaska. And one of the reasons we didn't coalesce with AFF-ER is because they weren't able to pull in the Gash villages. And I don't know, Marna, if you want to. So those are interior rural house seats. So around McGrath and Gash and Holy Cross, they pulled our villages into their coastal region for population numbers. And so it's one of the things that we were not able to support in their map. And then AFFR what is presented by, I want to say Robin O'Donoghue, and is really the Joelle Hall and the unions. That's who presented AFF-ER. And Doyon and TCC have actually coalesced before with AFFR, the Alaskans for Fair Redistricting. And you could see their map also pulls a number of the interior villages into a coastal region. And this map actually splits Minto and Nenana. And everybody on the line who knows me knows my family's from Minto, and that kind of drives me a little nuts. But outside of that, this is the reason we weren't able to coalesce with them. And you know what? One of the questions we got, not only from AFFR, but from Chairman John Binkley, was, hey, isn't it better if you have more representatives in Juneau? And, you know, in this map, you can see our interior region has multiple representatives. And the answer is, it is if you have a substantial number of people in those House districts voting. When you're a micro minority that's used, your village is used to just balance the population, it's not very meaningful. And that's why we ended up not coalescing with either AFFR or AFF-ER.
And that really goes for, you know, even neighborhoods within communities. I did want to say there's a reason why I did ask after access to this interactive map. You raise a good point. I mean, so much of the mechanics of trying to draw these districts, people focus on what their interests are or have a tendency to. Of course, the first thing I always look at is, well, what are the Fairbanks districts and how are they drawn? But I can, depending on how the maps are presented, particularly when you go to these meetings and they're cut out, you only have static maps on the wall, you can get a nice close-up of that, you know, your particular interest, but you will lose things like, well, what did this do down in Anchorage? Because there are maps that can make me very, very happy about Fairbanks, where I know would be very disappointing for someone in another community or area.
I was going to mention that about the website. And one of the things that I really like about the interactive maps is you can click on the district, it'll highlight it in white. And then over on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the Senate seat, the total population, ideal population, the amount of people over or under the ideal population, and then the deviation. And this is just really helpful, I think, to kind of get yourself and your brain wrapped around what the deviations are in any given area. I just really think that they did a great job on this website.
So you can see on AFFR's map, and also on the Doyon map, and also on board version 3 and 4, that House District 40 is pretty much exactly the same. And that's the two boroughs on the North Slope and the Northwest Arctic Borough. You can see they're slightly over deviated positively. There's actually too many people, 489 people too many for a House seat in District 40. And I'll tell you, in our first version of the map that we drew, we actually cut out Deering and Buckland, which are Nana region villages, and tried to put them into District 39. And Nana was like, please don't do that. We'll take socioeconomic integration over population deviation. And so you'll see on a number of maps that House District 40 basically over deviates the House District 40. And that's something that they really wanted to. When you're over deviated to the positive, you're basically underrepresented in your vote count. That's one of the things I learned in participating in redistricting. Now, zooming in on I'll just, a couple things. Drawing lines is very difficult. Like developing this map was work. It took some elbow grease, you know, and it took some time. We actually hired some mapping consultants as well to help us. And you have to go by population, and then there's some constitutional principles that you have to follow. So the population is kind of the critical one man, one vote idea for behind redistricting and driving redistricting. In fact, it's the only reason we have the census, despite all the other wonderful things we use the census for. The main reason we have the census is for redistricting. The other principles in the Constitution, the Alaska Constitution, are socioeconomic integration, compactness, and contiguity. Am I missing one, Marna?
No, got it.
So those are the things that we have to follow, and they're kind of subjective, right? So how do you draw, I think 10 years ago, we looked at a map that paired, I think, Aleutians with Bering Straits, I think. And it was like connected over the ocean. And it's a little eyebrow raising, but it's allowable. So, what the courts uphold is kind of what's allowable. And so you're using some of the court cases as an indicator of what the court deems appropriate. The Constitution also says that you may use local boundaries as a consideration for socioeconomic integration. And that comes into play when we're talking about Fairbanks. So we'll pull up board version 3. This is one of the things that we wanted to share. So all our villages, all the Doyon TCC villages, together with all the Adna villages, we're actually 4,000 people short of a whole house district. And so to make our interior house seat work, we actually need to pick up 4,000 people. And if you want to go over to our map, Marna, we actually pull in about 4,000 people from the Fairbanks North Star Borough. And we pull these people from Pleasant Valley, Chena Hot Springs Road, and Salcha. So that's currently how Mike Cronk's district is drawn now. Those same people are in the rural house seat 6. And they tend to be more rural. They tend to, we think that if you're going to pull out population from Fairbanks, this is historically the same population that's pulled out and been paired with our region. And so we also have some other rural non-native communities in our map. So if you look at like Nenana, for example, Nenana is both a native village in the Doyon region, but it's also a highly non-native community. And then if you scroll down the highway, you can see we have Delta in our interior rural house seat, Fort Greeley, et cetera.
Again,
So
this is similar to the current map.
Yep. And so that's where we pull our 4,000 people for Fairbanks. And a couple of the other maps do it in a different way. How version 3 doesn't pull any people from Fairbanks at all, and instead gets those 4,000 people from Valdez, which is a viable option. I would argue that Valdez as a coastal community is less socioeconomic integrated with our interior rural house seat than Fairbanks is, because Fairbanks is our hub, right? But that's one option. And then board version 4 pulls in those 4,000 people from Eielson Air Force Base. And now in our version 4, in the Doyon Fairbanks map, we actually put Eielson in with North Pole. And we say that North Pole is more integrated with North Pole than it is with our interior villages. I actually really like including Eielson with the rural villages. I wouldn't say it's necessarily socioeconomic integrated, but they tend to have a low voter turnout. And so any district that has Eielson in it, you tend to have a higher kind of voter power because there's such a low turnout on the base. But in our version for Fairbanks, we pull in Pleasant Valley, et cetera. So here's our Fairbanks. You can see, we talked about our map being a rural focus and then putting pressure on urban areas. And when we say that, we really mean Matsu and Anchorage. We don't mean Fairbanks, and that's because we're all from Fairbanks, except for our Alaska Coalition members. And so we took care in drawing Fairbanks. The one big rule we broke was we didn't really abide by the idea of a city of Fairbanks. So we don't really pay attention to the city of Fairbanks boundaries. But overall, we have what we call a east to west map here for Fairbanks. And we have the Esther Chena Ridge district. We have I apologize about the numbers. The board put the numbers starting in Ketchikan, and so we followed their numbering system, which is why you don't see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for Fairbanks. But our District 32 is essentially Bart LeBon's district. So Marna, I'll pass it back over to you.
Well, and so we actually had more than just criticism with regard to breaking the city boundaries, and we decided to do that for a couple of reasons. And I think it's good to look at the other maps and how they handle things, and then also to consider, and this is something that I think, I don't know if people like actually know this unless they're in Current House District 5, but Current House District 5 actually does have a Western Fairbanks component. Actually, I'm going to just go to it so you guys can see it. So here is our Fairbanks district. And if you'll look at Current House District 5, you get this western part, Chena Ridge, Chena Pump, and then it sneaks under because here's the city boundary. So when you look at the city of Fairbanks, it doesn't include any of the South Van Horn area. And so it sneaks under, it uses the Tanana Flats, and then it grabs part of Badger. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I realized that because I am not in House District 5. So it sneaks under and grabs this chunk of Badger. And one of the things that we tried to do when we drew our map was to avoid this, to avoid taking population from one side of the city of Fairbanks and adding it to another group of folks from the west side. And I think a lot of maps struggled with that because Fairbanks population really starts to get pretty interesting, and the census blocks get really tough to manage as you get up into the hills, as you can imagine. You don't have these, like in Anchorage, you have these nice, beautiful census blocks that are, exactly square. And in Fairbanks, it's the size of Rhode Island, And so you'll see that when we drew our map, we really were trying to avoid going under and using this Tanana Flats area to grab any population. So we drew our downtown district, our core district for what is kind of technically House District 1. And then we took it all the way down to the river, which I'm sure everyone on this call will recognize that these areas right here in South Van Horn don't have a huge amount of population, but to us, it didn't make sense to include them with a Chena Ridge population. I mean, those folks who do live there drive South Cushman, they drive Lathrop, they drive Pegger, and that's the district. I mean, if you're from Fairbanks, that's the district that we felt was the most like them and most socioeconomically integrated. So we took that district all the way down to the river. When you do that, though, that means that for the west side of Fairbanks, right, you end up having to get population, you end up having to go way, way up and go over onto Goldstream. So we did that. What it did do is because again of our dense population in certain neighborhoods of Fairbanks, it made what is technically House District 2. We really wanted to make sure all of Badger only got split 2 ways. Badger, unfortunately, has kind of been the redheaded stepchild of redistricting in Fairbanks, and people use Badger to fill out their population. And we thought, Badger should be in 2 districts. One, the Badger part close to North Pole should be with North Pole, and the Badger part close to the East Gate should be in with House District 2. Now, again, because of population differences, once you did that, we were not able to fit in the Hamilton Acres neighborhood, because that is very, very densely populated. So we made the choice to move that Hamilton Acres neighborhood up with Birch Hill. And this has met with some criticism, and it's understandable. The thing about Fairbanks is it has a lot of court cases that are specifically talk about Fairbanks, and which sometimes makes for a bit of, a tortured map for Fairbanks. You have to have 2 House districts for Fairbanks proper. You have to have 1 Senate seat for Fairbanks proper, which makes sense. But then it sometimes allows for some of these maps that have to grab in parts of Badger or have to grab in parts of rural Alaska in weird ways that don't make sense to us as we drew our map. So again, that's the rationale for our map. And I just want to now go through the Fairbankses for some of the other maps, if that's okay.
Sure. I will say, just as a fairly uncomfortable admission for a political hack, I didn't realize that the current map, so when I was looking at these new potential iterations, it did catch my eye that some of the maps were grabbing, again, stuff on West Fairbanks and coming underneath.
Yep.
And grabbing parts of, what I always consider kind of North Polish. I didn't realize that already is the case.
Right. And so
yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, some of that is driven by the actually city of Fairbanks boundaries. So like Marna talked about Badger, I'll point out Lakeview Terrace is not in the city. And so a couple of versions will sneak under House District 1 and grab. I think AFFR does that. You'll see that they sneak under and pick up Lakeview Terrace underneath Fairbanks as well. And so like, what do you do with that? Because you're trying to follow your local boundaries. Well, we decided collectively to just ignore the city of Fairbanks boundaries, just because the city of Fairbanks in itself, there's a lot of dense population neighborhoods in Fairbanks proper that are not in a city. And I'm talking about, Geist Road, Birch Lane, where I lived for a long time. University West is not in the city. And so we're just kind of like, well, I would still say those neighborhoods are integrated in Fairbanks. So we just didn't try to do this pulling in Lakeview Terrace, for example.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to break the train of thought. I will say, please note that there are a couple of questions in the chat box. So if one of you could skim those and just be ready. But yeah, please, Marna, carry on. Yeah,
and I guess go ahead, Sarah.
Oh no, I was going to say, I think you're really talking about board version 3. And I think the question in the chat about the overpopulation in board version 3 is also a question. And so I'll go there next. So board version 3 has this really interesting, it also goes under the Chena Flats, and it pulls together Chena Ridge and Moose Creek, Allison, Salcha, Harding Lake as one House district. And board version 3, the goal was to keep the borough lines whole, intact. And so remember, we talked about that with District 40, for example, but this is the only area where you have the borough lines not being broken outside of the North Slope. This board version 3 does break other borough lines in Mat-Su, Kenai, and Anchorage. One of the problems, one of the concerns we have about this map is that the population, now remember, the interior region needs 4,000 people to have a whole complete district. Well, Fairbanks has exactly 4,000 people that deserve a vote. And Marna, I'll pass it over to you because I think you would describe this more cleanly than I do.
Certainly, I'm noticing that the one that's highlighted, the District 35, it has a pretty substantial deviation.
Well, and so what this map does is by keeping the borough line intact, which is certainly something that the courts recognize as allowable. And one of the things that Sarah talked about early on is that there's all these constitutional requirements, right? It has to be compact, contiguous, and socioeconomically integrated. And there's also this factor, the main reason why we do a reapportionment is, again, to get to that one person, one vote standard. And so all of those things are sort of playing off one another. And when you're talking about the Northwest Arctic Borough, those folks said, we're okay with a high deviation because we want you to really focus on socioeconomic integration first. In Fairbanks, to keep the borough boundary whole would result in, if you'll look over on the left-hand side of the screen, a positive deviation of 4.42% in almost every district. Here's that the north part of the district, 4.43%. You go into downtown Fairbanks, 4.27%. Here's House District, what we would call House District 2, 4.34%. And then the North Pole Badger / Still Creek District, 4.26%. So by keeping the borough intact and not taking any of the voters out like we did to make our district whole, you have basically lessened the voting power for the entirety of the Fairbanks North Star borough. Anytime you have a positive deviation, that means one person less than one vote. So again, our whole goal of representative government and the main reason why we do reapportionment and the census each decade is to make sure that this number, this +4, is as close to 0 as possible, to make sure that one area isn't wielding more control over the things that are happening in Juneau than someplace else. And obviously at a national level, Alaska is exempt from ever having to worry about that, at least in the near term, because we have one congressman and we don't have to worry what that looks like on a federal level. And in states around the country right now, there are states who are losing Congress people because of reapportionment, right? They've lost population, another state has gained it. But at a statewide level, the discussion on how much that matters. So let's think about what the implications of having our vote mean less. What does that actually look like for Fairbanks? So Fairbanks is entitled to 5.2 House seats. Subsequently, Fairbanks is entitled to 2.6 Senate seats, right? So we get our 2 Senate seats from Fairbanks proper, and then that next senator, we should kind of control, Fairbanks should control a little more than half of that senator's vote and who's going to be voting for him. When you, or her, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So when you don't break the borough boundaries, there's no way that Fairbanks does not get paired with this interior district for a Senate seat. So as has historically been done, Fairbanks will, in every single iteration, Fairbanks will share a Senate seat with whatever version of this interior seat ends up being the final. And the thing to consider is, in this version, that seat takes in Valdez. In a number of other iterations, it takes in Cordova. Is that Fairbanks would share a Senate seat with the person then that half of that person represents potentially a coastal community and or potentially our interior House seat. And so it's just something to be aware of. We think that it's problematic.
You know, Marna, if you go on this map for map 2, I just want to point out a couple of things.
And actually, can you guys give me a memory check? My recollection as I was looking at these maps on the wall, all of this map suites had a deviation sheet, had what we're essentially seeing on the left-hand side.
Right.
You know, and you can see that for all of the House districts under that proposal. My recollection was that Fairbanks had the most deviation under version 3.
Yes. for Fairbanks. And we would say in an urban area like Fairbanks, your deviation should be around ±1, right? Instead of ±4 or +4 in this map. But I'll just show you some of the population deviations for Mat-Su in this map.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. They just click around, they're all underrepresented. They're all overrepresented. They have a negative deviation, and almost all of the Mat-Su maps, they're much closer to 1.
But they're all negatively deviated. And the reason why that's important is we're foregoing basically 1/5 of a House seat. And collectively on this map, we are giving the Mat-Su an extra 1/5, not quite 1/5 of a House seat based on their negative deviation. So if you'll see over here,
right.
Unfortunately, for lack of a better term, there's always going to be some situations on these maps where a little cannibalization happens.
Absolutely.
This one just was a little alarming when I looked at it, because it felt like we were the spot that got cannibalized.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
And our goal at Doyon has been that interior rural House seat, and we have been really proud of the fact that board version 3 and board version 4 have represented our goal, right? And so really it's on Fairbanks to say whether or not they like this over populated, underrepresented Fairbanks. And I, as somebody who lives in Fairbanks, it definitely is a concern to me. We want our map, whether if it's board version 3 that gets adopted, we want our interior rural House seat on something that Fairbanks can also support. And I'm not sure that having Fairbanks be underrepresented for the next 10 years is an ideal situation for Fairbanks to be in. So it's almost 9 o'clock. I think we answered all of the questions in the chat except for the Senate pairing. The board didn't really ever get to Senate pairing. We did on ours more or less. It goes by numbers, but I'm not sure why they didn't Senate pair. Marna, do you?
They decided they were going to wait to see what the final map looked like and then to hear preferences from folks, which I actually think is appropriate. There's no requirement to include the Senate pairings. I know a lot of people want to see that, but some of the big, there's a couple presumptions that take place, right? You know that the 2 seats from Juneau are going to be paired together. One of the issues with our map is that the 2, according to case law, is that the 2 downtown Fairbanks seats need to be paired together. So there are some things that are dictated by case law that the board will have to consider in their Senate pairings, but I think they wanted to hear from folks once they started circling around what their final map looked like. Particularly in Anchorage, where there are potentially some downtown Anchorage seats that would be paired with Eagle River, for instance, and people had really strong feelings about that. And then also, I think Anchorage really was that was one of the places where there was probably the most people concerned about where they went, if they went to the north or to the south, et cetera. Fairbanks, because again of that Supreme Court decision, which again, precedence only is good for as long as it's good, that suggests that Fairbanks needs to have 1 senator, that I think has pushed some of the pairings in the Fairbanks area.
So do you guys have questions? Go ahead.
Yes, that I was going to ask. So while we do have a few more moments of your time, yes, I would open up the floor if there are any questions.
And I'm also happy to show, because we didn't dig into the Fairbanks of some of the other third-party maps. I am perfectly happy to drive and pull up some of the Fairbankses from the other third-party maps if folks are interested in seeing that. So just tell me.
Okay, well then just on a personal basis, because I'm at the head of the table today. Yes, that would be great. But then second of all, if we could have, before we close, just an understanding of what's the forward process, what actually happens to move these proposals toward final proposals? And how is the decision made regarding the final map?
That's a great question, Jomo. So they're collecting public feedback and time is very short. Ideally, anybody in this group that wants to give feedback should probably give it this week. Because after this week, we think the board will, after kind of a month-long marathon session of going to all of these communities across Alaska, they've really gone to a number of communities across Alaska. They will reconvene and take all of that feedback. And I think the process looks something like you shake it all together and you put it back out again on a final map. So I don't think the final map will look like any of the proposed maps. I think it'll look close to some of the proposed maps in different areas of the state. And they'll basically look at adopting a final map. And they're required by the Alaska Constitution to adopt a final map by November 10th. So if you want to weigh in on this process, like really this week is your chance to do it. And I apologize for not presenting sooner or kind of showing some of this to you sooner. Marna and I have been presenting around Fairbanks and around the state, but really the goal is by November 10th, the board will have a final version.
I see also that Peter has joined, and perhaps Peter might want to speak to that as well. I know that the final day for call-in testimony is October 30th, but Peter, maybe you can tell us if they'll be taking additional public testimony prior to the board's adoption as they have in other.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, JMO, John Binkley here. I've been listening in as well, and
Good.
I apologize that for not being there in person, but I'm wondering if at some point I might be able to offer a few comments.
Oh,
Absolutely.
I would have set up a long time ago, Mr. Chairman, if you were on. I knew you were on the phone.
Okay, well, why don't we take this in parts?
No problem, but go ahead, and I think Peter's now on also, so if he's got some comments, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Hi.
Okay, hi, thanks. Yeah, I apologize for not getting on sooner. Sarah did a great job, actually. We are going to convene after an extensive road tour. We're going to meet, we believe, November 2nd in Anchorage at the LAO, and that meeting will be live streamed as we've done in the past. We intend to take public testimony the meeting will start about 9 a.m. on November 2nd, and then we have to do the roll call and agenda, but then we usually move right into public testimony. I expect that to be the case as well on November 2nd. So that's a great time to weigh in if folks still have thoughts that they have not shared with the board. Although I would encourage folks who might be listening to give us your comments through the website sooner if possible. That's actually the fastest way. If you give us verbal comments, they actually have to go through a transcription process before they're added to the database of testimony. And if you add it on the website, then we can keyword search it and it gets emailed to members within just a few days. So the web is really the best and fastest way to get us your thoughts. And we'd love to hear from you. And then we will take public testimony again on November 2nd. However, after that, I personally will be encouraging the board to dive into actually, shaking it all together and coming up with a hybrid map. That's a huge lift, and I have no idea how long it will take. So I feel like if folks have testimony they'd like to bring, I would highly recommend do it on the web as soon as you can. If you can't do that, speak at our November 2nd meeting in the morning. And after that, I'm not exactly sure what the forward moving agenda will be. That's up to the board.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Great.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, if I could just make
Oh, yes, Mr. Chairman, please do.
Yeah, thank you. Just a few things that I heard, and again, I apologize for not being there in person, but I wasn't aware of the meeting. There were a few things that, and Marna and Sarah did a great job, but there were a few things that I'd just like to point out in terms of what some of their testimony was regarding the Fairbanks North Star Borough and whether or not to break the borough apart and put a portion out into a rural district or to keep the borough whole. That really is a pivotal question for the board, and one that we'll be struggling with to do that. Our legal counsel have told us that priorities, socioeconomic integration is more critical than deviation within reason. I know Sara mentioned that deviation in urban areas should be plus or minus 1%. And that is true, but that is within those municipal boundaries. That's the guidance the courts have given us, at least according to our legal counsel over time. So while plus or minus 1% may apply within the the 5 House districts within Fairbanks, it is not applicable to comparing deviation in Fairbanks versus deviation in other areas of the state. So the only guidance in that really has been at the federal level, which is plus or minus 10% overall deviation between overpopulation and underpopulation of districts. So if you look at version 4 and version 3, I think particularly version 3, that's the tightest deviation of any within the Fairbanks North Star Borough. All 5 districts extremely, extremely close in deviation. The other thing was the assertion that the primary reason we do this every 10 years is just to adjust the deviation in population. That's not, at least according to our attorneys, not the case. It really is to make sure that there is socioeconomic integration in the new proposed districts to reflect the population, but again, going back to socioeconomic integration as a primary, as opposed to reasonable deviation. That's kind of the legal guidance that we've gotten. The question really is, and it's, I think the board is open-minded to this, but do we want the borough to be together in the 5 seats, or do we want to take and break the borough and send a portion of the borough out to other areas like we have right now? For example, the people on Chena Hot Springs Road, Pleasant Valley, and that area, some of the testimony we received in Fairbanks, they don't like having the representative from Tok. They like being able to go down to the Fairbanks LIO to meet their legislator, to be a part of Fairbanks in terms of the people that represent them. So really the question is, if we go to take 0.2% and send them out to a rural district, which part of Fairbanks wants to go out into that rural area and have their representative be from another area, not necessarily Fairbanks? And I didn't hear anybody in the public testimony or in any of the written comments that we've said raise their hand and volunteer and say, yes, why don't you take my area where I live in Fairbanks and pair me with a representative that might be in Tok right now, or it might be in Holy Cross, or it might be in Glen Allen, or wherever that representative may come from, because that portion of the Fairbanks voting population will be extremely small compared to the larger area in that rural district. We've worked hard. Doyon's done a great job. They've put together a statewide proposal. We've worked hard, I think, at the board level to try and follow their desires to have all of the Doyon district, all of the Otna district, all of the Alaska district together. That's going to be difficult when we go out to areas like the Chilista region. They would rather see the Chilista region whole, which means you have to start to pull into the Doyon district to pull population out towards the Seward Peninsula and the Nome area in order to balance the Chilista region. So it's a difficult puzzle, but we've taken Doyon seriously in trying to design a district that keeps all of their interior villages together, as well as the Otna villages as well. So it's a tough balancing act, and as Sara mentioned, we're going to spend the next 2 weeks really, or next week and the following week, in trying to pull all this together to have one final plan that's ready to go on November 10th. So just a few observations, and I thank you for your interest. It's important, as has been stated. It really sets the table for the next 10 years, and I'm pleased that FEDC is engaged in it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Do appreciate you being on and appreciate your comments and appreciate your efforts. Mr. Torkelson, you had your hand up, so please. I do want to ask, though, again, just for final clarification regarding end game. Again, we've got a bunch of proposals out there. There's 6. You're getting public feedback. Somehow that will be worked into, you seem to be characterizing it as a final proposal. And it is just the redistricting board that gives final approval of that final proposal, or does it go to someone else as kind of a third party?
No, and it's Mr. Chairman, it's not a proposal, it's the final plan. It will be a proclamation of what the plan is. And then the public has 30 days to challenge that plan in our Alaska court system through the Superior Court. And every time this takes place, every 10 years, it is inevitably challenged legally in court.
Oh, so that's why it's court challenged every time. Okay.
Yeah, because somebody is not happy with it. You know, it's unfortunately, as we've gone around the state, we take seriously every community's concern and interest and thoughts, but ultimately, it's a puzzle you have to put together, and not everybody is happy with it. So sometimes municipalities challenge it in court. Sometimes third-party interest groups challenge it in court. Somebody's not going to be happy with the process. And they're, you know, the way they express that is through litigation. And then it's a working in progress with the court as they come down with mandates and opinions, and then the board going back and trying to fit within what those mandates and opinions are. And then it inevitably gets challenged and appealed to the state Supreme Court. And then those rulings will shape, in addition to the board working with what the guidelines of those court decisions are, coming up with a final plan that is signed off by the court system.
And so that explains why the final map that we're currently operating under, what I want to say was finally certified in 2013.
Correct. Because 2011, they couldn't get a final decision between the court and the redistricting board, and so they ran out of time because there is a deadline of June 1st, which is the filing deadline for all of the House and Senate seats, and of course we've got an election next November. So that does not change. And if the court and the board can't come to a decision, as happened the last time, then they have an interim plan. And the court said, okay, let's have this interim plan. Go ahead and have the election in 2011 or 2012. And then we'll come up with a final plan for the next election, which they did. So the one we're operating now was proclaimed in 2013, went into effect in 2014.
All right. Thank you, sir. So, Mr. Torkelson, and by the way, John, stop calling me chair. I just facilitate these meetings.
Oh, I thought you were the chairman.
I am not the chairman, sir. I just get up early to put on the show. So, Mr. Torkelson, please.
And I'm happy to answer any questions as well, too.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, our chairman's doing a great job. So I was just available for questions on, the final process if there's additional questions. And there's a little more nuance. There's another, we do have some court guidance on the deviations in addition to 10%. A previous board adopted a policy of we shall have 2% or less deviations, which sounds noble. But the court system threw that out and said you overly constricted your options by arbitrarily putting a pin at 2%. That was too tight. You forced yourself into choices that you didn't have to make in terms of blending areas that might not be socioeconomically integrated together just to hit this arbitrary 2% figure. Like what? Why 2? Why not 2.5? Whatever. So our legal counsel's made it clear that, not to be overly focused on a number, say 2%. We know that that's too tight to just say 2% it must be. That's too tight. We know, as Chairman Binkley said, that 10% is too much. So there's some gradient of some gradient between those, that the board has to balance all these constitutional factors which are in tension with each other. As we've seen, you can make fantastic deviations. I think we had an online plan submitted by anonymous. We still don't know who did it. And their deviation was 0.063% across the entire state. It was, I think that's probably the lowest deviation possible. But to achieve that, they blended Southeast Alaska with Kenny Lake and part of the Otna region. And they just, crazy things to try and make all these numbers hit a target. So there's a lot of nuance involved. There's a lot of competing factors. It's a delicate dance, if you want to say, or the courts have said a Herculean task to try and balance these factors. So the board's aware of this. It's an active conversation. I have no idea what the board will choose to do. I imagine it'll be a robust conversation.
All right, and a conversation again that will be happening, commencing November 2nd.
I expect, and again, I can't project what the board may do for sure. I think we're going to meet November 2nd, and I expect we'll end up meeting a couple more times at least that week. Whether or not the board chooses to do a fully formal process every day, or whether they choose to break into small groups and do some breakout sessions as people consider different alternatives and try and blend different concepts. I can't predict. The staff are trying to prepare for, both possibilities. But really the board's, it's whatever they want to do, we're going to facilitate. And the one thing we know for sure, about the only thing I know for sure, is by 11:59:59 on May 10th, there's going to be a final map. And other than that, it's up for discussion.
Right. Well, everyone, thank you so much. Chair Binkley, Director Torkelson, Ms. Sanford, Assemblywoman Sanford, I still get to call you that for a couple more days. Again, we have the benefit of having these wonderful people online. Do we have any questions from the group? All right. Oh,
yes, Jomo, I have a question.
Yes, Mayor Hopkins, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So is one able to see the submitted written comments that have been submitted to the board yet? Or if not, when will we be able to see those? Because we just heard Chair Binkley say that what he heard in public testimony in Fairbanks was overwhelming, or we all heard his comments, but possibly the written comments that have been submitted after that speak to different issues about breaking up Fairbanks. So when can people see, or can they see? And I'm sorry, I don't have the information yet that is somewhere on that redistricting website. I look forward to a comment on that.
Certainly. Sure. This is Peter. Our website, akredistrict.org. In fact, maybe I should just share a screen. Would that be helpful?
Yep, here, let me co-host you, sir.
Okay, let me get the right website up, get the screen up here. Let's see, all right.
Although Ms. Sanford could probably pull it right back up for you, boss.
She probably could. All right, so you should be seeing my screen now with
Yes, sir.
the website. So yes, Mr. Hopkins, or Mayor Hopkins, yes, the answer is yes. You can read the testimony. I believe we're into the thousands of pages at this point, but you would scroll down to the bottom of any page and click on meeting info. And then you'll see there's public test board meeting information. So this has a lot of things like agendas, live videos. You can watch the videos from when the third parties presented their plans. That can be useful if you have the time to do so. But then there's public testimony packets. These are the packets the board receives. So instead of hitting members with 40 emails a day or 150 emails a day, what the staff do is we collate this into a packet that we send out about every 3 to 4 days. And these packets are available for you to view and download on the website. They're extensive. They have a cover page with the names, and these are all alphabetically organized.
Actually,
So
Mayor Hopkins' wife was, there's Mayor Hopkins and his
There's
wife was the top of the right column. Okay.
there's Mr. Hopkins' testimony from 1020 on page 55. Because this is a PDF file, you can keyword search it, which I find to be very useful. If you think someone was referencing something specific, we try. Here's a formal letter from another third-party group. Sometimes if people submit maps, we scan those. Here's a resolution from the Aleutians East Borough. So as far as with very little exception, and I say that's because there's always a couple of people who recorded testimony who the transcribers come back and say, hey, I need a little help here. Can you chase this down? This is 99.5% of everything that's been received up through the 23rd. And of course, we'll have another packet coming in just a few days. So I would also encourage you, if you would like to stay informed, if anyone's listening who's not, you can use our Get Involved tab. Give us your first name, last name, email address, and you'll get blasted emails every time where there's new meeting agendas, new meeting notices posted. Of course, we're drawing sort of towards the end stage here, so it's going to come to a close fairly quickly. But still, if you have any interest, please give us your email address, and we will keep you as informed as everyone else is about the happenings.
Well, thank you for that in-depth
If I could
explanation. I do want to say that that there was public testimony in the Fairbanks area when the chair just spoke as I commented on. So thanks for going over those 55 pages or more per packets or whatever it was. But I still recall hearing a division about how Fairbanks ought to be looked at in the various maps at the session. So thank you very much, Peter.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could just comment too, Mr. Mayor Hopkins, I'm fairly certain I didn't use the adjective overwhelming. I did say in testimony, and it was actually Gary Newman in testimony from Pleasant Valley who testified about being represented by the representative, I think Representative Cronk from Toke. And so that really was what I was referring to, not that there was overwhelming. And if for some reason I did use that, which I'm usually pretty careful with my words, but that was the only one that testified that they did not appreciate being represented by somebody outside of the Fairbanks North Star Borough.
Okay. All right. Well, I would open it up for any final questions. We are well past the hour. But again, if anyone has questions, now's the moment to ask them. All right, well, then I will end on a note of appreciation. So I very much appreciate, thank you, Chair Binkley, thank you, Mr. Torkelson, thank you, Ms. Sanford, thank you, Ms. Obed, for this very interesting presentation. I've learned a lot. This is the first time we actually, I don't know that we did this 10 years ago, but I'm really glad that we did. Learned a lot. Thank you very much for walking us through the website. There is an enormous amount of information on there. I know time is short, but for the record and for the citizens, know that there is there's really good information on that website. It's very accessible, and in fact, it's much more interactive than I could have ever hoped. So again, great job on that. At least as far as providing the resources, it's very much appreciated. So everyone knows we saw one of the resolutions there in that packet. We do have a discussion. Apparently, it's in the papers that this Thursday, the FNSB Assembly will be considering a resolution weighing in on this subject. I believe they're also going to be taking public testimony. Ms. Sanford is nodding and smiling, so I guess that's a yes. So that would also be another moment when citizens can voice their opinions regarding this enterprise. But again, to officially have your thoughts considered, you should go to the website. I think is probably the best way to go through the website, use that comment section. So it will surely be codified and forwarded onto the board. And beyond that, we'll all just be keeping an eye on your work and looking for the final product, or at least this interim final product. Everyone, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Hope everybody has a great day. Just for the good of the order, I want to say that, so future meetings. I want to say that I have meetings now through really before the holiday season. So next week, we're going to have a presentation on the Eielson micronuclear from ASEP, from Ms. Gwen Holdman over at the Alaska Center for Energy and Power. That was recently announced in the papers. They got a pilot project for a micronuclear reactor there at Eielson Air Force Base. Following that, we'll be having a presentation regarding mining from our friends at Felix Gold. And then finally, to round out the pre-Thanksgiving, a presentation regarding some of the fiscal proposals from members of the Interior Delegation. All right, well, everybody, thank you so much. Again, Peter, thank you so much. John, thank you so much. And everybody just have a great day. And yeah, let's all get our democracy on. Okay.